All right, so last class we talked about Blender and the basics of Blender. We talked about navigating through the program. So for instance, I have a 3-button mouse here, and I strongly recommend that you use a 3-button mouse when using Blender. Just makes your life easier. So for instance, the first thing I'm going to do, let's pretend this is my 3D object. I can do what's called orbiting, which means I take the camera and I orbit around the model. To do that, I'm basically just going to click and hold the middle mouse button, drag around. You can see I'm orbiting around my cube. I can zoom in and out on my object. On a 3-button mouse, I can use the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel, to zoom in and out. For some reason, you don't want to use the scroll wheel or you don't have a 3-button mouse, you can use the zoom tool there. Just literally click on it and drag to zoom in and out. By clicking and holding with your left mouse button. I can also pan, which means that my camera will move up, down, left, or right, as opposed to orbiting or zooming. On a 3-button mouse, you can hold down the Shift and middle mouse button, and that allows me to pan my object. Another way to do that would be using the hand tool. We talked about dividing up your user interface into panels, and, switching between panels. When you have a panel, there's always in the upper left-hand corner, there's always a little icon here, and if you click on it, it would actually give you a drop-down of any possible panel. I'm going to be honest, most of these we're not really use. The main ones we're going to use are the 3D viewport. Eventually, we will use the UV editor, although we haven't gotten there yet. The outliner, the properties. Eventually, we use the timeline, not right now. And that's kind of it. And the other ones are maybe the shade editor down the line. So let's say I wanted to switch to the outliner just for whatever reason. Boom, there's the outliner. Or I can switch it, boom, to the properties panel. I can take a panel like this and divide it by, if I click on the little gutter, right click, where it says vertical or horizontal split, a vertical split splits it in the vertical direction. Now I have 2 panels. So if I wanted to have more than one viewport or view of the same object or my scene, I could do that. If you want to merge 2 panels, if you right click rather than using split, vertical, or horizontal split, you can do what's called join. Join will let you join. If I join to the right, whatever is selected will merge these 2. If I join, or sorry, that would be first. Yeah. Join left. Join right, we take this and merge it to the right. We can merge down. All right. This thing that kind of looks like a life preserver, that is my 3D cursor. Kind of like right, by default, it starts in the middle of your world. Just gonna kind of place it. When you add a 3D object to your world, if you're going through the object menu, wherever it is, that's where the object will be added. So for instance, if I go to add mesh, remember a mesh is a collection of polygons. So if I added any of these objects, like a cube or a cone or a torus, torus is like a donut, essentially. You'll see it gets added where my cursor was, okay? Anytime you do something in Blender, that's bottom left, this is like the last command you did. It would give you options that you can kind of mess around with this. So for instance, this would let me play around with like the size of this object. I could play around with how many geometry pieces there are. Okay. When I highlight my model, I can tell it's highlighted because it has this orange halo around it. I can use tools like the move tool to move it around. I'm moving based on the axis point. In Blender, the red is always the x-axis, the green is always the y-axis, and the blue is always the z-axis. So I'm moving my object around in 3D space. I can also rotate it in 3D space. And I can scale the object in 3D space. Another way to do this is if you want to be very particular, if the object is highlighted over here in our properties panel. Remember, properties are properties about the highlighted object. In this case, this donut or this torus. Over here under transform, for instance, it's telling me the exact location in XYZ coordinate space. So it's at 2, -1.7, -1.26. If I really wanted to be precise about its location or its rotation in one direction or its scale in one direction, I could, use these panels here to be very precise. So for instance, just for the sake of argument, let's say I want it back at the origin of the world. That would be 0, 0, and 0. Okay. Or if I want it exactly in the +5 direction, and for z, there's +5. Okay. So you can be very precise if you want to do that. So I can move, rotate, scale my object. I can also manipulate the geometry that makes up this object. Okay. I'm going to put this into wireframe mode. To do that, I can either click in the upper right-hand corner, this thing that kind of looks like a wireframe sphere, or I can hold down the Z key. And if I hold that down, I get a little pop-up menu that says wireframe or solid. I'm going to choose wireframe. Okay. So this is the geometry that makes up this particular model. These are polygons. Polygons are shapes, like a square or a rectangle or a triangle, that sort of thing. I'm going to put my object into edit mode just so we can see the pieces a little bit better. So these points here, let me use a better color. These are called vertexes or vertices, plural. Vertices, it might be a little hard to see with the light on, but vertices are where edges come together. Okay, so when edges come together, you will get a vertice. Between two vertices is an edge. Think of an edge like the side in geometry. If you have a side of a shape, this is like this. So between two vertices is an edge. When you connect 3 or more edges together that are, boxed together, you get a face or a shape. So for instance, this here would be a rectangle or a face. So if I did this, that is a face. Okay. If you want to know a little bit more about your object, if I'm in object mode, I'm going to go down here to the lower right-hand corner. Here it says 4.3. That's the version of the software. But if you right-click, you can get what's called scene statistics. See where it says scene statistics? I'm going to turn that on. And if I do that, it actually will tell me. A little hard to see here, but trust me, there's the name of the object, and it actually tells me how many vertices there are, how many faces there are, how many triangles. Don't worry about that. Triangles, every face gets divided into triangles, essentially. Why triangles? Because those are the smallest, simplest shapes. It's easier for computers to calculate triangles than it is to calculate rectangles or squares or things like that. So this would tell me how many vertices, how many faces are in the selected object. So I know I have 152 vertices and about 150 faces here, in case you care. I'm going to put this into edit mode. I'm going to do that by, if I have the object selected, doesn't matter if it's wireframe or not, I can go here under object, under edit, or I can hit the tab key. Tab would also switch between edit object and edit mode. Once you're in edit mode, you can highlight the subcomponents of that model, which is the vertices, the edges, and the faces, and manipulate. So for instance, if I come into here and I highlight some of these vertices, as I'm doing right now, highlighted a couple. Once they're highlighted, I will move them, thus affecting my shape. Okay. I can highlight edges, which means I would highlight the edge. I could move that around to edit. I could also do things like scaling it, bring them closer together, or the vertices closer together or farther apart. I could also rotate them to affect my shape. I can also select faces. If I select these faces, I'm going to pull them like that. And I'm changing around my object. Okay. Add a cube here. And let's talk about some other tools we can use. So I can move around geometry by manipulating the vertices, the edges, and the faces. We can also add additional geometry. Adding additional geometry will make it easier for me to make a more complex object. I'm going to go to edit mode here, and I'm going to select the face here. And what I'm going to do is do something called extruding. This is the extrude tool here. Thing that kind of looks like a box with a green top. When you extrude, you essentially pull out new geometry from whatever that shape is. So right now, this is my shape. It even has a little plus sign. If I click and drag, I'm adding all of those faces and vertices there, as you can see. If you were to highlight more than one face, notice how the faces are in different directions. Okay, this one's facing this way, and that way, this is facing down. If I were to try to extrude this with just the regular extrude tool, all of my extrusions would have to all go in one direction, even though the 3 different faces are in different directions. There's something in 3D modeling called a normal. A normal means like the way that the geometry is facing. So if my geometry is facing this way, that's my normal. If the geometry is facing this way, that would be the normal of it. So each one of these has its own normal. You can actually even view it. If I remember how to do that, which I believe. Yeah, I can come into don't worry about exactly what I'm doing. There's a little thing called overlay here. And I can actually view, or used to be able to. Where is it? Fade and active geometry. Oh, face orientation. Maybe not. Here it is, normals. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to turn these on. See these blue lines? Those lines represent the direction that that particular geometry is looking in. Notice how that's going that way. That's going that way. This one's going downward. If instead of using extrude region, I'm going to say extrude along normals. What that means is they're all going to extrude, but since each one has a different normal, each one's going to extrude in its own direction. So if I take this and extrude outward, you can see they all kind of looks weird here. Let me go. So yeah, they all kind of extrude in their own direction there. I'm going to turn that off because it's kind of annoying me. Sometimes we might want to cut through our model as a whole. To do that, we have something called a loop cut. What a loop cut does is it takes your model and literally kind of divides it. I like to think of it like if you had a birthday cake. It's like You have a birthday cake, it's the whole cake, right? And you take a knife and you divide it, and it still looks like a birthday cake, but it's been divided into two parts. That's kind of what's happening here, except you don't technically separate them. They're still together. They just have like a cut through them. That cut's going to add a lot of geometry. It's going to add vertices and edges here. So if I click, I just added a bunch of vertices here that now I can manipulate if I want to. Instead of just, if you don't want to put it where it's putting it, you can actually click and slide it to be more precise about where you place. Okay. So for instance, now I divided this face into multiple faces. So if I did this, I could extrude it, just that one piece. Another way to divide a face is to use what's called the knife tool. What the knife tool does is it allows you to take a single face and divide it into multiple faces. The way it works is you go from the edge to the edge, okay? So for instance, let's just say for the sake of argument, I wanted a line that goes from here to here. I could start from this edge. That blue mark kind of represents where my vertex is going to be added. This represents where my edge is going to be added. And if I click, go all the way to the other side, click. When I finish, it would add an edge there. It technically kind of keeps going, so I could just keep adding edges here. And when I'm done, I'm going to hit return. Each of these is now edges that I could select and manipulate, or these are individual bases now that I could select if I wanted to. So for instance, I could select that. Extrude things. There's also an inset tool. What an inset does is it takes whatever the shape of the face is, and it makes an interior cut that's the same shape. Okay, it doesn't go up or down. It's not an extrusion. It just cuts it. So for instance, if I come in here, highlight this face, and I'm going to use the inset tool, you'll see that if I click and drag, oops, do I not have the face selected? There we go. See how it's like making that same shape. And I let go. Now it didn't go up or down, but it did inset it. And then I could use like the extrusion. When you start doing internal extrusions, you may want to turn on the X-ray mode, which is up here. This kind of lets me see inside of my shape. Or option Z would also be the toggle for this. Right. Last thing, or last major tool is the bevel tool. When you bevel something, you have a hard 90-degree angle, and then you take that and you like cut across it. Okay, this is like a woodworking term. We can actually do the same thing here. So what I'm going to do is highlight this edge right there. And I'm going to grab the bevel tool. And I can click and drag, and you can see how it's kind of beveling. It's kind of creating that cut between the two. Make it look a little nicer. So there's my bevel. A bevel is actually a nice way we can do a faux rounded corner. So if I click and drag this, by default, it's just going to make one face that goes between the two edges. But if you come here, if I increase the number of segments, it'll never be like a true curve, but you can see how it's kind of like rounding it out a little bit. It creates that kind of arch kind of effect. It does that by basically adding more geometry. Couple more things. There might be times you might want to merge two faces together, making them one face. So for instance, Let's just say for the sake of argument, I wanted these two faces to be together. If I select this edge, what I can actually do is remove this edge or get rid of it. I can do that really easily by right-clicking and going to dissolve edge. When you dissolve an edge, you remove it. That then means the two faces merge into one. Okay. You can also remove geometry. So for instance, if I wanted to get rid of this particular face, I'm going to right click, delete face, and don't worry about those colors. Let me turn this off. It's probably from, there we go. See how I kind of made a hole here? You guys kind of see that? I got rid of that face. Okay, it's like if I took a cabinet and took one of the pieces of wood out of it. Okay. You can also delete vertices and edges. So for instance, if I was in vertice mode, if I took these three edges, or sorry, vertices, right click, delete vertices, that would delete all the geometry that's related to it, which in this case would actually add a little bit of a hole. And that kind of brings us to the next thing. What do you do if you have a hole? Well, we can fill them in. What I'm going to do is highlight this edge. Highlight this edge. Might help to be in wireframe mode to see it a little better. Highlight this edge. If you have all the edges of a hole highlighted, you go to Face, Fill. And that will fill in the hole with new geometry. If I go back, you can see that that's been filled. Let's do it again. Highlight all of the edges. Make sure all of them are highlighted. I'm just holding down Shift to highlight multiple. Fill. I can do that here as well. So might help me just do it in wireframe mode to get a better sense of it. Face, fill. All right. That's general stuff that we talked about on Monday. Any questions? Anything I talked about? All right. I gave you guys a couple of labs to work on. Today will just be lab time to work on those labs. Oops. Yeah, it says this. First lab is just literally basics of like how to even just like, you know, add stuff, move stuff around, just like kind of object mode. The second, this will be due next week. Second lab goes through basic modeling. It kind of does what I just did. You guys will build a treasure chest and a throne by adding and manipulating geometry, extruding, and that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to give you guys a more open-ended project where it's less kind of follow along instructions, and it's called Spaceship. Okay. What you guys are going to do is create a spaceship out of a piece of geometry, single piece. Okay. So I thought I would show you how to do this just real quick, just to give you an idea. What I'm going to do is go back to Blender. Here, let's start again from scratch, new file. I'm just going to join these two. I'm just going to get rid of everything by holding, if something's highlighted, you want to delete it, you can just hit X, and that would delete it. Let's add a cube. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a rocket. I'm going to go to my top orthographic view. And let's just kind of make this a little longer. This is going to be the front of my rocket. This is going to be the back of my rocket. First thing I'm going to do is kind of pull this out a little bit. So let's go to edit mode, and I'm going to highlight this face. And let's extrude that a little bit like this. And I'm just going to kind of scale it down a little bit. Give it more of a shape that I want. I can put this in orthographic mode to kind of see what it looks like. Okay. I kind of want this to be the cockpit, so I'm going to highlight this. And let's do a little bit of an inset. It looks pretty good. And then I'm going to pull that in. And I kind of want this to come to a point. So actually what I'm going to do is highlight this And I'm going to go to face, and I'm going to go to where it says poke face. And I did that so it gives me this X mark so that there's a vertice right in the center there. And then I can take that vertice and let's just pull it out like that. Okay, so I kind of can get what I want. I want my, I'm going to kind of round this out a little bit. So I'm going to take these 4 edges here. And let's use the bevel tool. All right, that kind of makes it a little less boxy. And then let's kind of round them out by using like the segment. I don't want too much geometry, but like, that looks pretty good. All right, let's go back to, here's my object. All right, cool. I'm gonna go to top view and I'm gonna make like a fin. What I'm gonna do is like I'm gonna make a cut here. So let's use the knife tool. I'm just gonna kind of cut my shape like that. Let's take this shape and I'm going to extrude it. And let's kind of pull it back. And I want it to kind of get wider at the edge. So maybe I'll highlight this edge and use the scale tool to kind of scale it out along the X direction like that. All right. And maybe just for fun, let's highlight these 2. Oops, not that one, but this. And let's do an inset. And I'm gonna extrude, but extrude along normals so they both go interior. Just a little bit. Just to give it, maybe like a little more. There we go. I'm gonna make some wings. Let's put it into this. And I'm actually gonna just use a loop cut. I'm gonna do that and then that, and that should have cut through. Oops. I guess I couldn't do it because, all right. There's too much geometry there. I couldn't use the loop cut, but okay, we'll just kind of eyeball it here. Let's put it in a wireframe. I just want my lines to kind of match up. Oops, not that one, but. All right. All right, so I got, oops, didn't get the second cut here. All right, let's select this one. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's select this face. And let's select that face. I'm gonna go to top view and let's extrude these outward. Oops. Can I only select one? Oh, because I gotta do extrude along normals. Let's do it a little longer. And I kind of want these to get thinner to get them a little more. And let's have them go backwards a little bit like that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna come in here and I want like a triangle shape. So what I'm probably gonna do is let's go to edit mode and let's use the knife tool. And I'm gonna kind of do something like this. And now that I've cut that, I'm gonna highlight this and let's do an inset. So it's kind of like got this triangle shape here. I'm going to move it up a little bit like that. And then I'm going to extrude that. And then I want it to kind of be like a pipe. So the way I'm going to do that is inset and then extrude inward. All right, not my greatest work, but you know, a rough kind of 3D shape. Obviously, if I planned it out, probably help me out a little bit there, but you know.
That's the idea. That's the idea across.
That's the idea across. So this is kind of like something. So what I want you to do is start with a basic shape, add geometry, however you want to add it. You know, use the knife tool, use extrusion, use, you know, the loop cuts or whatever. Pull stuff out. A lot of geometry is just moving around, or a lot of modeling is just moving around geometry. Okay, so think about how to get the shape that you want. Okay, and that's kind of the idea here. Any questions about anything? All right, just a couple of notes.